You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. And be sure to smash that like button. Always look forward to this conversation. Bill Connelly's good enough from ESPN.com to join us each year to talk about this when his SP Plus rankings come out, which happened yesterday. He's on Twitter at ESPN_Bill C if you want to give him a follow. Bill, we appreciate the time as always, man. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How about you?
Doing awesome. As I always say whenever you come on, you're a self-described stat nerd, which I love. It's a good way to look at things. And you also must be a masochist because you put out these numbers and just invite criticism from every fan base. So good on you for taking it all on. But if I asked you point blank for someone who's never heard of or knows anything about SP Plus, the elevator pitch, if you were to describe it, what is it?
Tempo adjusted, opponent adjusted measure of football efficiency. I think that's the thing I try to put in every piece. It's a power rating. It's a predictive system based on kind of the more sustainable aspects of a game. You know, like turnovers are funky and unreliable, big plays are funky and unreliable, but things that are a little more reliable, that's what it's based on.
And the three criteria, of course, that we always talk about: recent recruiting, recent success, and returning production. I would imagine that, and every time you and I have had this conversation the past few years now, like the portal just has changed this so fundamentally. So how have you adjusted for that?
So, when I say returning production, when I write about returning production, that's really kind of misleading at this point. I just didn't want to rename it. It's basically like returning and incoming production.
Right.
So if you lose your starting quarterback, but you bring in somebody else's, then that guy's new stats kind of just get crammed into the equation on both sides. You return like 50% of your passing yards, and that's kind of how it works. That's how I did it when teams were signing 3 transfers a year, and it seems I've had to change the weighting of a lot of things, but it seems like still kind of just using that approach has still made for pretty good preseason projections. So I've stuck with basically that same process.
What do you think has been, as you've seen it, the biggest change as part of that? Like, is there something that you've noticed in doing this every year that with the portal and changing those numbers and the formula that has been maybe a position or something like that weights it sort of heavily?
Yeah, I think the biggest. So I've tried to, once teams started signing 20 transfers a year or whatever, I tried to basically incorporate those players into not only returning production, but also the recruiting rankings piece. And so, basically, the recruiting aspect of these projections, it's mostly transfers the first year. You're going to have a lot of transfers playing, probably not many freshmen.
Right.
And then basically over the course of 2-3 seasons, it kind of flips around to where the guys you signed as freshmen carry more weight. So that's been the big. And I mean, every year when we have more data, I'm able to I was having to make some guesses kind of that first year that USC signed like 25 guys, and Colorado signed 50. But now we kind of have at least a decent idea of how things are going to go, and it works a little better.
Now you put up this metric, but you're also a football fan, so you have eyeballs that show you football. Whenever the rankings, these rankings that published this week at ESPN.com first came out, there had to be something that you looked at and went, "Oh, I'm not sure I thought that was going to happen." What was it? What was the surprise thing?
Well, I mean, you don't have to go very far down the list. I knew Ohio State was going to be number 1. I wasn't really anticipating Alabama being number 2.
Yep.
That one, I knew they'd be up there because, I mean, SP Plus didn't hate them last year. I thought a couple of the losses were pretty fluky and didn't punish them a whole lot for it. So I was prepared for them to be like top 5 or top 6 or something. But they're like top 40 in returning production despite losing their quarterback, which basically tells you they're returning a whole heck of a lot elsewhere. And you combine that with, recruiting still being strong and obviously recent success, whether they should get credit for that or not now with the coaching change. Right. They grade out very well. I think the program's still pretty healthy overall. I just was I wasn't quite expecting to see them in the 2 line there.
That when I did my commentary on it yesterday, that's where I led. I'm sure that's probably where most people were looking at as well. Bill Connelly is with us. We're obviously here in Baton Rouge. You got a lot of people interested in LSU. The Tigers are 10th on the initial SP Plus rankings. If you would tell us a little bit about how LSU landed there. When you look at your metrics, what jumps off?
Yeah, I mean, that's, they're another program that's just kind of vaguely healthy. There's nothing that's really dragging them down a ton. Obviously, the defense a couple of years ago wasn't great. Got better in 2024, just as the offense kind of was still solid, but fell off a little bit. They just haven't quite got all the arrows pointed in the right direction yet. If this was based solely on returning production, they'd be about 14th. But if it was based solely on that recruiting piece that I said was transfer heavy, they'd be projected third. So that, you add that with a pretty good recent history from the last 2, 3, 4 years. And then, that feels like about a number 8 to 12 program. Obviously the transfers, I'm really excited about the defense. I'm just really curious. I love when Blake Baker has enough guys he can be super aggressive with. He does pretty good things. And so if both of the injured linebackers are healthy and Patrick Payton, I think he still has a really impressive fifth gear. We didn't see much of it last year. But I think the overall potential of that defense is super high, and you combine that with one of the, Nussmeier's not, I wouldn't call him a Heisman favorite or anything, but he's still one of the better returning quarterbacks in the country, and he's always going to have receivers at LSU. So that feels like quite a bit to offer there.
On Twitter at ESPN_Bill C, if you want to give him a follow. By the way, Bill, LSU fans are going to come at you in your Twitter mentions for saying Nussmeier's not a Heisman favorite. He's got the second best Heisman odds runner. So just prepare yourself. I honestly, I say that not knowing who I think is a Heisman contender at this point, because half the time that you don't see him coming at all. So I guess maybe I should say everybody's a Heisman contender and just cover my bases. Sometimes it feels that way, but I think there's a lot of people here excited about Nussmeier for a lot of reasons. But isn't that every program at the start of a season where optimism abounds? What about the flip side of it, Bill? If Alabama surprised you they were high, what's a team that you thought would be higher than they were on your initial rankings?
It made sense once I thought about it, but I was expecting Texas to be a little higher just because, I know that's, if you're not voting for Ohio State number one, odds are decent that you're picking Texas. There are a couple, Penn State maybe. There are some other candidates. But I kind of expected Texas to be top 5, but they're down at 7. I think the main reason for that, number one, is that they weren't top 5 last year. SP Plus didn't necessarily trust them as much as, especially offensively, as much as I would have expected. They had the number 2 defense, but they were only 13th on offense. And then that offense, SP Plus isn't programmed to give them a bonus for Arch Manning, so it just sees they lost their quarterback, their top 2 receivers, 4 starting linemen on offense. So it doesn't necessarily see a unit that's going to improve. And so it basically sticks them about where they were last year. It caught me off guard, but once I started thinking about it, I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
We've lived here just around the top 10. Is there, I should have prepped you for this, but do you remember a team last year and recent year that maybe at this point was not near the radar that ended up being a playoff team or a team that contended?
Indiana, obviously.
Sure. Where were they a year ago? Do you remember?
Where were they projected? Is that 80s probably?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that will qualify. That will qualify.
Yeah. I'm sure they got a little bit of a transfer boost because they brought in a bunch of transfers last year, but their recent history was garbage. So even though I liked Kurt Cignetti, I was thinking, well, maybe they could make the bowl. And they kind of exceeded that, but that's almost cheating. Indiana was an absolute out of nowhere kind of thing. I thought I was saying a lot by thinking that SMU was a dark horse ACC pick last year, not a dark horse, playoff contender. And they were really, really solid top 15 level as well. So yeah, I think that's just something we're going to, the projections are going to be mostly good. And then there are going to be some teams that just hit the perfect kind of chemistry with the transfers they bring in. And and then maybe the opposite happens, like Florida State relies on transfers and suddenly has kind of a dud class and plummets. I think we're going to see, there's just going to be some teams that are way off based on that. And also, it's kind of fun. I like my projections being as accurate as possible, but it's really fun when you don't see things coming.
Yeah, I just pulled up last year's August, right? So right before you're right. Indiana was 81. SMU was 27, so not far off there. But Florida State, like you said, was 12 going into the season. But look, Georgia was 1, Ohio State was 2, Oregon was 3, Texas was 5, Penn State was 6. Notre Dame was 9. That's half the playoff you had in the top 9.
Right.
So there's a lot. That's why we like to do this, because this has proven over time to be a pretty accurate representation of what's going to happen. Last thing, Bill, how much variance do you expect now to the start of the season?
Yeah, I'm really I don't know exactly, because I mean it is funny. We've already passed last year's national average in terms of like transfers per team, and we have another full window to go here. The second window, obviously, it's unlikely that any huge quarterback names or anything like that are that might change the projections pretty drastically. I don't think any of that's gonna. We're not going to see much of that in this spring window, but we're going to see a lot of guys move who, thought they might be able to start and figuring out that they won't, so they hop in the portal, and that changes a bunch. I would say that we're like probably 2/3 set here. I would expect Ohio State to be number one no matter what, unless Jeremiah Smith transfers, which I doubt. But yeah, I mean, we're still going to see so many teams are clustered together after number one that, we could see some teams move up or down based on portal movement, and curious I don't completely know what to expect there.
Bill Connelly, ESPN, the SP Plus rankings are up right now. You can go read him there. You can follow him on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, at ESPN_Bill C, which is probably good that you went Bill C so people didn't have to figure out how to spell Connelly. How many N's, how many L's? Is there a Y? Is it an EY? So it's pretty good.
E or an O, that's a big one. There's a Scottish comedian with basically my name with an O-L-L-Y. So, that makes Google searches kind of weird.
Yes. Bill Connelly, we appreciate it, man. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.